I don't know that there are many horror games that make me feel as uneasy as Silent Hill. I would argue that at the time of writing this, I find it hard to be as affected by horror as I used to be, given the library of horror games that I've devoured one after the other. Yeah, I went through a phase or two, leave me alone. But I find that horror is at its best for me when it's not so much a question of what, but why. You see, in the games that I've played, one thing that stands out more than anything when assessing how effective they are when delivering on their scares is the storytelling. Rich tales that disturb with implication, and by showing what it wants, when it wants to. And it's in this section that Silent Hill sits comfortably. So join me. Today we will be looking at what makes Silent Hill a masterpiece within the horror meta. From its mechanics to its story, we'll be exploring what makes Silent Hill an almost perfect horror experience. But before we get into that, I just want to say thank you so much. We're currently on 20 subscribers, and I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but to me it is, and I'm quite appreciative of you guys taking your time just to watch my videos. If you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It does mean a lot to me that you're interested in my content. Thank you. Silent Hill starts you off with an enigma of an opening, to say the least. You see, unlike other horror games or games in general, the actual opening of the game is the intro itself, showing you key scenes that can occur before you hit the start button. It tells you how our hero ended up in the town, the circumstances he will soon find himself in, as well as some other key bits of information I won't spoil just yet. You finally make it through, and after some kick-ass intro music that, let's be honest, you're gonna now add to your playlist, we're finally here. Immediately, we find ourselves in a particularly strange situation. A town covered in fog, mysterious noises in the distance, and figures that can just barely be seen. It is here that we are put into the shoes of our main protagonist, Harry Mason. His goal? Well, it's simple. Explore the town, find his daughter Cheryl, who has mysteriously gone missing after the car accident that Harry has just woken up from. Silent Hill immediately starts off by making you uncomfortable. You are drawn forward mostly by Harry's own intuition, as he spots a lone figure in the distance that resembles his daughter, at least in the way that she is dressed.
Cheryl? Is that Cheryl? Where are you going? Hey, wait! Stop!
From a technical standpoint, Silent Hill adds to this dread by adding fog into the proceedings. The fog is important to note here because not only does it actually help hide the limitations of the PS1's draw distance, but it also creates an unsettling sense of dread because you cannot see what is ahead. Think about it. You aren't scared of the dark because it's dark. You're scared because you don't know what's in the dark with you. Similarly, you don't know offhand what's waiting for you in the fog. And this works as a fantastic segue into our next subject. It is here that we need to talk about how this is all presented to you. Silent Hill came out after Resident Evil, Parasite Eve, and Alone in the Dark, all of which made use of a fixed camera angle system with pre-rendered backgrounds. I greatly enjoy these games, but if there was anything that threw me off just a little bit, it would be there were moments, for me at least, where my suspension of disbelief was thrown for a loop. Not because of the story, but because of the presentation. The use of pre-rendered backgrounds meant that they could be more detailed and vibrant, and putting a low poly model in the mix of these elements is what sucked me out of the horror at times. Parasite Eve has a pretty funny example of this right at the beginning. You're in a backstage hallway and there are bodies laying on the ground. These bodies are very low poly as you'd expect, but the backgrounds are pre-rendered, which for me looked like they just didn't belong there. To an extent, Silent Hill does borrow from the playbook of these games. However, it makes one major change: fully 3D backgrounds. For me, this is exactly what I needed. I needed the characters, the objects, the scares, the monsters to all look like they inhabited the same place, which meant that when I played, I was utterly drawn in. Because they are fully 3D modeled, it also means that Silent Hill can one-up its predecessors and actually be more confident with its camera, allowing for bold camera angles that bring you closer to the action or emphasize momentum in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Moving through the town, you find yourself in an alleyway covered in blood, and it's through your exploration of this area that you get your first glimpse into what makes Silent Hill so special. But we will go into that more later. You go through a great number of horrors here at once, and it's a lot to take in. The demon rugrats being relentless as they are, to a body that's nailed to a fence that's mutilated beyond recognition. Harry is appropriately terrified at this point, and you, as the player, must escape to safety. Being that this is a scripted encounter, you're destined to die anyway. However, once you do, something kinda strange happens.
Mon Dieu, ceci est poli. Huh? Oh, thank God. It was all a dream. All a dream. All a dream.
Nah, of course it wasn't that. I'm just messing around, don't worry. We are introduced to our first other character here, Sybil Bennett, who explains that she's a police officer from the next town over and that she's going to call for reinforcements. Harry asks about Cheryl, only to find that he is the first person that Sybil has actually run into since arriving in town. Oddly, she seems to trust Harry, with her gun, leaving herself presumably completely unarmed. I have to say, this threw me for a loop when I first started this game. She literally just handed the civilian a firearm, despite never mentioning any monsters. But at least we can protect ourselves from the various dangers that lie ahead. The game takes this opportunity to introduce you to the combat mechanics. A pterodactyl busts through the window and pretty much forces you into the deep end of a battle. Unlike his predecessors from other horror games, Harry Mason is a lot more nimble and capable than the average. You aim your gun and you can move forwards and backwards to either close the gap or create some distance between yourself and an enemy. Additionally, when not in aim mode, yes, I'm calling it that, you can do a sprint using the game's tank controls, and do a Mario hop backwards to try and dodge or avoid horrors. A couple of gunshots later and you are safe at last, and you can continue with your heroic quest to save your daughter. You go back to the alleyway from earlier and you find a hint stating that Cheryl may be at the school, which is your first real exploration where you have to find your way around. You see, the roads in Silent Hill are wrecked beyond belief, meaning you'll have to find an alternative way to the school. In your search for these alternate routes, you find more hints as to where to go, one leading you to a house on Levin Street, and then around Silent Hill in search of some keys that will allow you to access the back garden, thereby leading you to the school. This mini quest does do a good job of getting you acclimated to the control system, but if you're anything like me, you'll keep pressing the wrong button at the wrong times. Many broken roads and strange pathways later, you manage to make it to the school, and this is where things start to get really strange. You explore a little bit and find yourself in the courtyard, and your main objective is pretty much spelled out when you examine the area, that you will need to find some items to activate the clock tower, which will allow you to progress to the next area. The school is peppered with its fair share of scares, but my favourite comes in the form of a small moment in the locker rooms. The game has already made you feel uncomfortable with its strange imagery, so when you reach the locker room and you hear a thumping in the distance, you expect and anticipate something disturbing.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Kitty! Yeah, it's just a cat, but sadly the game does something that made me pretty upset afterwards. The sound was important for me to note because now it's an excellent segue into... The game makes excellent use of its sound design at every possible opportunity here. The game designers understood when and how to use sound effectively to pressure you, or to make you feel nervous over nothing. The most excellent examples of this, however, occur when you're in the nightmare realm. The sounds of clanks and the foreign sounds in the distance, and the disturbing moans that are released by enemies when they approach you, and even more so when you fight them. Sound, while used effectively today, was used more effectively in the PS1 era because that was something that they had to rely on in order to create the atmosphere that they were aiming for. And yes, I know, maybe I'm putting too much stock into sound, but if you don't believe me, try playing Outlast with the sound off. You'll speedrun it. Sound is a very effective tool within a horror game because most of the time you can't really see what dangers lie ahead, and therefore you're trying to listen out for the sounds it makes or the types of steps it takes or anything like that. And so it works as a method in order to instill fear and paranoia through just that one sense alone. You can't see, you feel more comfortable if you can see, but you don't feel comfortable if you can just hear what's going on. A lot of Silent Hill's gameplay is predicated on the fact that you have to find items and use them in conjunction with various objects that you run past. In later games, you do have to make a few leaps in logic to do this, however, here it isn't so bad. You're always given an idea of what each item does thanks to the game's descriptions of each item. A great example of this is the chemical bottle in the school, which, based on its name, could be anything. But if you look at the description, it specifies that it's a form of acid. This is necessary when solving the old man puzzle, which mentions that it can only be opened using sage water. Even if you don't know the backstory behind that, you can assume that the chemical liquid is the sage water in question, and this will allow you to solve the puzzle. You do a bit more of this, including a fun little piano puzzle, all the while avoiding the dangerous little rugrats that roam the halls of Midwich Elementary. And they are seriously persistent, I have to say, and pretty much immobilize you for a solid 10 seconds, leaving you open to an ass whooping, or an ass stabbing, depending on the situation. When you finally solve the riddles of the clock tower, you make it through the door, climbing deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, approaching and climbing down a ladder, progressively making your way down what appears to be a pathway to the underground. And then,
Where am I? Have I been here before? I don't remember this being here before.
surprise, you are back in the exact same spot you were in before, except things are just a little bit different. For a start, there are new markings on the ground, and when you walk into the school, you find that the janitors haven't been paid in some time, and so are on strike. But in all seriousness, this is your first glimpse into a world that both makes total sense and no sense at the same time. And this is where the strange, reality bending presentation of Silent Hill really comes into effect. Some doors lead nowhere, others completely alter the layout of the place, and, as normal as it sounds, the doors are locked from the other sides. You will find yourself repeating the same sequence of activities. That is, that you will have to fetch items to use in conjunction with other areas of interest, or to access areas that you couldn't access before. Story wise, it doesn't progress the plot much, but rather unnerves you with more sounds and sights that make you feel less and less comfortable. You are exposed to more mutilated corpses, nailed to more walls and fences, and you are treated to the sounds of Cheryl pleading with Harry to help her and asking him where he is, further pushing forward your purpose and making you feel less capable in the process.
Daddy, help me. Daddy, where are you?
Cheryl!
The game also prepares you for a lot of things to come. Exploring this rust-infested school provides you with key bits of information for an obstacle that lies ahead, which, in my playthrough, I narrated with my signature reading voice. Leave me alone, I'm a nerd. But it is helpful. It is a snippet of a story that tells you that a hero defeated a monster by tempting it to swallow him, and then as it opened its mouth, the hero striked, thereby killing the monster. This information helps you understand a boss fight that comes later in the form of what I can assume is Cerberus's cousin that no one likes to talk to. You shoot it a few times and then its mouth opens. That's when you strike. It quite literally puts the beast down in a matter of seconds. Reality bends once again and Harry finds himself awake in the boiler room, seeing a lone figure that he has never seen before. But we have. We know her. She was in the intro, remember? The girl covered in bandages. An inquisitive player at this point would start to ask themselves a load of questions. The bandages? Was she injured? Does this happen later? What is her purpose and why does she keep showing up at the strangest of times? Well, more on that later. Upon your awakening, you find that the school, at the very least, has returned to the broadest definition of normal. That is to say, the janitors have been paid, the walls are clean, the flooring replaced, the breath of fresh air that you needed to catch after the ordeal that you've been through. However, this isn't the end just yet. The game doesn't confuse you too much with navigation, unless you really suck at it like I do. Your next points of interest are always hinted at, and with a little reading and orienteering, along with Harry's insightful dialogue, you are more than capable of finding the next area of interest. In this case, it is a church. You make your way there, but not before some extreme pterodactyl combat! Seriously, they're the most persistent enemies in the game. The dodge is so specific. You arrive at the church and at long last, you meet her. The greatest, most overacted character in this whole game. Dahlia Gillespie. I love her voice actress. You can tell that out of everyone who was casted for this game, she was the most excited to be involved. I mean, seriously, just listen to how she says things.
I knew you'd come. You want the girl, right?
The girl? You're talking about Cheryl.
I see everything.
She's amazing. The character herself, on the other hand, is straight up insane and does nothing but speak in riddles. She makes it clear that she wants you to do some monster hunting in order to expel some hidden darkness in the town, but the problem is she does it in such a cryptic way and sounds so batshit insane that you aren't liable to believe her at all. Luckily, what isn't so cryptic is the direction she wants you to go in. In fact, she explicitly says,
Make haste to the hospital before it's too late.
Spoiler, you can wander around the town for an hour and nothing will happen. There is no too late, as she likes to put it. You make a mad dash for the hospital and we meet our next major player in this game, Dr. Kaufmann.
Hold it! Stop! Don't shoot!
He is by far the most cryptic character in my opinion. What he says makes perfect sense, but it's that he reveals so little about himself that when you are actually listening to what he says, you don't really understand his purpose or why he's even holding a gun. Part of you knows that he has something to do with what's going on, and that he is aware of the various points of darkness in the town, but how or why he is connected to these things make little sense on the outset. Harry, being the trusting man that he is, approaches the stranger carrying a revolver, and reveals that not only is he looking for his daughter, but that he is also a widower. Why he needed to tell Kaufmann that is beyond me, however it does serve to give you a little more insight into Harry's character, and this bit of information is important to note. Kaufmann, just like everyone else, lectures you about the same old thing. Be careful during your travels, some well wishes and waves goodbye. You casually begin to explore the hospital where nothing really seems amiss at first. I mean, aside from the fact that it's empty, it is pretty much what you'd expect from a hospital. It's even quite clean, sanitary, aside from some red liquid you collect from one of the officers with a plastic bottle. But more on that later. The only quest you seem to have is to switch the power on. This way you can use the elevator and start exploring the other floors for more information, or to expel darkness as Dahlia likes to put it. Once done, you can finally begin to explore. Naturally, you take the elevator to floor 2. And when you walk towards the door once the elevator has taken you there, you realize... yeah, the door's locked. So what? There's still an entire 3rd floor to explore. So you make your way back to the elevator, you examine the buttons and... This had me terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought when I first played this game. It's a very simple trick. It's so, left field that a button would just appear out of nowhere. But not only does it serve to increase your paranoia, it increases your curiosity. Why is it there suddenly? Why is the game deemed Floor 4 important? You hit the button, and suddenly you end up in the nightmare realm, rust covered as it is, and you know things are about to get heavy. There's some key bits of information that you learn here, that being that there was a patient admitted to the hospital and that they were barely alive. Something happened to their skin, and that they were kept in the basement. You find a You find a photo of the patient and...
What's this? Looks like someone's been here.
Look familiar? Yeah, this is the girl that we've been seeing everywhere. Her name is Alessa. You will need to keep this logged in your mind for a little while as we move forward. You are introduced to some new enemy types in the forms of nurses and doctors, both of which are horrifying. They had these tumors sticking out their backs and they just moan and groan in the most disgusting, freaky ways. It's a surefire way to increase your paranoia. Here we get introduced to another player in this game, Lisa Garland. She is a nurse who appears to be trapped in the hospital, specifically the Nightmare Realm, and she is probably the only character besides yourself that appears to be confused. With Sybil being certain that there's a logical explanation for everything, Dahlia being certain that darkness is coming, and Kaufmann just being as enigmatic as possible, it's nice to see a character who is on the same wavelength as you. Except she appears a bit more paranoid, and in the first instance you get the feeling that having been here for a while, that the hospital horrors have just gotten to her, and her sanity is just starting to dwindle. A short conversation and a migraine later, Harry awakens in the normal hospital again. This has him questioning his own sanity a bit, but fortunately his company is quite a bit crazier than he is.
It's you.
Yes, Dahlia Gillespie.
She doesn't do much more here than speak in riddles again and then point you towards the antique shop, expressing that the task of defeating the darkness is beyond her own abilities, so Harry being here to try and clean up the messes seems like a blessing to her. Some more running from dangers later, you finally make it to the antique store where a load of info is dumped on you at once. The next 15 to 20 minutes of gameplay is more cutscene than gameplay. And whilst it would probably frustrate most players, I actually don't mind it that much. The world of Silent Hill is interesting enough that when characters actually talk about it rather than asking about their daughters and saying that they're confused, I'm definitely more likely to listen to it and absorb the information. It helps in letting me piece together the various happenings, and it's actually far more appreciated on my part. I can see how this is going to frustrate a lot of players that are just looking for jump scares and some tension, but to be fair, the things covered here are not entirely pointless. Here you learn from Sybil that she has seen Cheryl near the river, and that most of the roads leading here are completely destroyed. Harry seems completely sick of this at this point, but he presses on to save his daughter.
I was just wondering. Never mind.
You go through the wall and you pick up an axe, which I never use because I'm a badass, and then disappear. This leads to another cutscene where Lisa gives you more information about the town. It's important as she talks about a cult, the religion that they were following, and how affected the town was by it.
Here we're on the quiet side. Everybody followed some kind of queer religion. Weird occult stuff. Black magic, that kind of thing. As young people moved away, the people figured they'd been summoned by the gods. Evidently, things like that used to happen around here all the time.
Strangely, after this mental experience, Harry once again wakes up surrounded by mutilated bodies, and begins to wonder if this whole thing is in his head, and if he is dreaming as a result of the car crash. Don't worry, this isn't canon. The town centre becomes our next point of interest. This is the part of the game I always screwed up, even on my first playthrough. The rifle is here and I never bloody pick it up. That's my fault though, I even know its exact location yet. I never really go for it. But who needs rifles anyway when you have extreme pistol action? The town centre shows you a video of Cheryl, once again pleading for her life as she appears to be locked away somewhere, tied up and unable to escape. It's actually a bit of a haunting sequence. The marks of each epitaph that Dahlia talks about is on display here, and it is a bit like the town of Silent Hill has chosen to mock Harry, berating him for his inability to find his daughter, a constant reminder of all his failures. You go through this town centre until you eventually battle a worm. This fight is easier with the rifle, but again, if you're like me, you opted for the pistol and the shotgun out of pure desperation. After this, you run through the town and make your way to the hospital. Since you are in the nightmare realm, the only person you know of is Lisa, which means only she would know how to get to the river. You manage to make it there and a cutscene serves to show you two things. One, how to get to the river in question.
Underground tunnel out there, used for inspections or something. I remember.
And two, more of Lisa's personality.
Harry, don't go! I don't want to be alone. It's so scary, I can't stand it.
How about coming with me? This may not.
Lisa at this point is succumbing more and more to her fears, and is barely holding on to the little bit of sanity she has left. However, I assure you, there is a reason for this. After this, we encounter my favourite boss in the game, the Giant Moth. I love this boss solely for how ridiculous and visual it is. I mean, it's the type of thing you expect to see in a modern action game or an over-the-top hyper-parody game, or even better, a good Godzilla game? Which is honestly really hard to come by nowadays anyway. After defeating the Giant Moth, you make your way to the school as Lisa recommended. Luckily, there's no busy work involved, whereas when you hit the bridge, you are fast travel there. The game does this a couple of times and it's very much appreciated, reducing the filler content and showing that the developers wanted to keep only what was necessary in the game. A gunshot or an axe swing later, you make it into the sewers. I have to say that this stage is probably my least favourite in the game. It works like a maze, which is interesting on the outset, but the monsters you go up against as well as the puzzle solving elements are very hard to enjoy. The monsters especially I cannot theorize about. I haven't the slightest clue what they represent or what they're supposed to be to begin with. You work your way through the maze of gates and filth and you finally manage to make it to the other side. At this point you have one of two options based on whether or not you have played the game before. At the end of the game, after the credits and the bloopers are done, the game will tell you what kind of ending you received. Because of this, you can assume that you can do a few things to make the ending a little better. The outcome can change based on how much you inspect the world, and the kinds of things you interact with. In my case, I managed to discover that Kaufmann has a side quest you can complete. You save him from a very, very persistent monster in a very, very wrong looking scene. However, you push through and he thanks you for your efforts. Inspecting the pub, you can find Kaufmann's wallet, which contains a little trove of items that will guide you somewhere else on the map. You go to each location on this bread trail until you finally manage to make it to the motel garage, where Kaufmann's bike is kept. It is fair to assume at this point that he is renting a room here, and that you'll find the key to the motorcycle there. If you manage to open the bike's boot, you'll find a vial of the strange red liquid that you had picked up in a plastic bottle back in the hospital. Kaufmann shows up to slap you on the wrist for invading his privacy, however, this just serves to confuse you even more. You know for a fact at this point that this red liquid is linked to all of this, and that Kaufmann is deeply involved with this, dare I say, conspiracy? You head back on track after this, moving through the pier until you reach the boat. Harry is reunited with Sybil and the two exchange a bit more information. It's funny to see Sybil still deny everything that is going on around here, insisting here that everything has a reasonable explanation and that the town is on drugs, despite evidence of the contrary. I have no idea why she doesn't recognize the monsters when she sees them. Dahlia shows up to give you less than an inspiring speech about saving your daughter by stopping the demon at the top of a lighthouse and the center of an amusement park. Basically saying that you are the only hope that she has, and her intentions seem noble despite the fact that she's crazy. You make it to the lighthouse only to find that you are too late. The mysterious girl disappears. The only other place left for you to check out now is the amusement park, where Sybil is. Unfortunately, however, Sybil is possessed. Very, very possessed. But it's okay, a few cute things later you can just throw the red liquid at her and call it a day. But if you're like me on your first playthrough, you definitely tried to kill her with just a pistol, and failed a few times. Saving Sybil provides you with more information, and Harry reveals here that he and his wife actually found Cheryl. She isn't his biological daughter at all. Upping the level of mystery, you're right to infer that Cheryl is somehow connected to the town, and that this is why she is missing. You finally meet the girl that you've been seeing visions of all around the town of Silent Hill.
I figured you'd show. Hold it right there.
A photo from earlier reveals that her name is Alessa, and she shows up usually when you are leaving the nightmare realm. A standoff happens. Harry is knocked back by Alessa's psychokinetic energy, but the item you were given by Dahlia much earlier starts to resonate, and it weakens Alessa significantly. The bigger revelations of this story start to hit from this point on, so strap yourselves in, it's about to get really ugly. Dahlia shows up just as you seem to have saved the day, revealing not only that she is the bad guy, though let's be honest, you didn't need to be told that. I mean, look how she acts. But also, she's Alessa's mother. She seems to be fixated on the idea of summoning a demon using Alessa, but she couldn't capture her on her own. Using Harry's desire to save his daughter against him, she used him in order to capture her daughter, by convincing him that her daughter was captured by the demon. They disappear, and Harry wakes up in the nightmare realm. Can we just take a minute to appreciate how menacing Lisa looks here? Lisa sort of gives you an indication of where you may need to go next to investigate, and puts more of her paranoia and fear on display. She says that she went to the basement, and there were creepy rooms, but she didn't investigate any further. This is the final stretch of the game. You are in the realm known as Nowhere. Literally, this is what it's called. You have no map, and you have to use your own orienteering skills in order to make your way through this maze of reality bending. I use this term because nowhere makes no sense. You will be in the rust-covered hospitals 1 second, and then, after opening a door, you'll end up in a school. The areas of Nowhere each tell a story about Alessa, and can be used to understand the monsters of Silent Hill and the reason for their appearances here. Starting at the schoolroom. The schoolroom, upon entry, has a lone desk in the center. When you inspect it, you will find carvings that say "Go Home" or "Thief." This is Alessa's desk. She was bullied in school by the other kids. Once you realize this, you also realize the purpose of the monsters that you found at the school. They were all the size of a child, and so represent the children who physically or vocally abused Alessa for being the weird one, evidenced by their groans and their need to stab you. The shadow demon is harmless, and I wasn't able to figure out its purpose at first, but in its appearances it seems to run away from you. In my mind, this was a representation of Alessa. She didn't look or act like the other kids. She wasn't confrontational with them either. She couldn't and wouldn't fight back, and so her only option was to run away. There are a load of flying demons and dog-looking demons scattered around Silent Hill. These are representative of the drawings that are in Alessa's room. If you look on the floor, there are drawings of beings with wings and other animals. I could be wrong here. Something else I've seen other theories point out is that these monsters are representative of Alessa's and Cheryl's fears of dinosaurs and dogs, and that this can be evidenced by the book that Cheryl is reading in the opening. Following the fear thread, it makes a bit of sense too, as there are more fears on display here. We found ourselves fighting bugs quite a bit through the game, worms and moths for example, in giant form. Perhaps these are the bugs that frightened her the most. Maybe these were the ones that she associated most with danger. Either way, they are manifestations of Alessa's own perceptions. More notes can be found that give enough reason for why the monsters look the way they do as well. A note can be found in nowhere that tells you Alessa was the one who suffered from the burn wounds, and was barely recognizable when she was admitted into the hospital. If you look at the various monsters you battle in Silent Hill, you'll also find that their skin appears to be burned off, leaving only a pinkish color behind. They are an extension of Alessa in a way, the worst parts of her, and it makes sense that they would take on the appearance of the moment she felt the worst. Nurses and doctors are everywhere in the nowhere sections, each one deformed with some kind of tumor coming out of their backs. Alessa, at the time of hospital admission, had begun to associate doctors and nurses with pain, and therefore begun to fear them. They had likely poked and prodded her with various drugs and injections in order to keep her stable, but given the type of childhood she had, this was seen as a negative. The quest here has you exploring all of the rooms in order to obtain keys to unlock doors matching their symbols. During this, the largest of fetch quests, you encounter Lisa one more time. But this time her paranoia is at an all-time high, and we finally find out why. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. Lisa tells you she has realized why she is still alive in nowhere. She is one of them, one of the many demons that terrorize the place. It makes sense, she is also a nurse. And if the nurses are one of Alessa's many fears, it's fair to assume that this includes Lisa as well. What we get here is a plea for help, and an amazingly animated cutscene which was way ahead of its time. It's amazing to see how detailed this is, and how reactive Lisa is to the blood trailing down from her head. It's details like this that demonstrate how far ahead the developers thought when creating this game, and it's an excellent touch to say the least. The scene serves to make you feel both terrified and sorry for what you thought was an ally this entire game. Knowing now that she was one of the dangers is sad to say the least. Shortly after her scene, you can go immediately back into the room, where you can read her diary. The diary reveals that Alessa was admitted into the hospital due to being burned, and that taking care of the child had traumatized Lisa to the point where she needed drugs just to stomach the ordeal. This, to me, is also a huge contributing factor to her paranoia, either because she was still on the stuff when talking to Harry, or that she was having withdrawal symptoms from it, both of which can cause paranoia and confusion to take hold, especially in an extreme set of conditions like Silent Hill. Grim Reaper puzzles and key acquisitions complete, you start to get further insight into Alessa's backstory. A room that you are familiar with now shows you a vision of a discussion that confirms even further why you are here. After Alessa was burned, she lost part of herself that needed to be called back. This was 7 years prior to the game, when Harry found Cheryl. They speak of casting a spell that will lead the lost part of Alessa back to Silent Hill, and this leads into the events that start the beginning of the game. Events had already been manipulated from the start, and Harry was destined to end up on this quest regardless of the circumstances. And what's that we see? Is that Kaufmann?
Oh my dog! What's up?
We immediately get another one of these flashbacks where Alessa is shown being abused by her mother. Her mother is trying to coax her and drag her into doing something, whilst Alessa is pleading that she just wants to be with her mum. It's a little sad. You can definitely see that Dahlia has gone off the deep end long before the events of the game. The final scene varies based on the choices you made throughout the game. In my most recent playthrough, it went like this. Dahlia appears with Alessa and what looks like a corpse. Sybil is there too, but makes stupid choices like pulling out her gun, aiming at Dahlia, waiting for her to finish talking, and then yelling free.
Just a little longer and all would have been for naught. It's all because of that man. We must be thankful to him. Even though Alessa has been stopped, his little girl has to go. What a pity. Freeze!
Dahlia knocks her out using psychokinetic energy, but then Harry appears to finish off Dahlia once and for all. Dahlia goes into a monologue about how she's going to use Alessa to bring a god into this world. After her monologue is over, Kaufmann shows up to throw red liquid on everyone, except Harry. This sort of stops everyone, however Alessa gives birth to this giant winged demon and we have to take it out with nothing but our pistol. Well, there goes. All I've got is my pistol in hand. Some bullets. Yeah, we're gonna go for it. Killing the demon causes Alessa to split herself further, giving Harry a baby that he can raise hopefully in a life away from Silent Hill and the cult. I prefer this ending because, true to the spirit of horror, the only people who get what they want are either possessed or vengeful. Lisa happens to be both, as she appears out of nowhere and drags Kaufmann into the ground. They both are assumed dead whilst Harry, Sybil, and the baby escape Silent Hill. Harry doesn't necessarily get what he wants her, however he does get a chance to make someone else's life a little better in the form of a reborn Alessa, and hopefully they can go on to live a happier life. A weird thing that happens after this is that there is a blooper reel. I find this strange because I haven't come across a large number of games that include that, but in a weird way, it does kind of endear you to this story just a little bit more, because it feels now that you met the people who worked on this ambitious project, and you appreciate it just that little bit more. Silent Hill is a confusing game to say the least. It's packed with puzzles, it's packed with story tropes that make little to no sense on the outset, and require a great deal of inference on your part in order to start making sense of what exactly happened here. It's not a game for the faint-hearted. There are a lot of visuals that seem to disturb and really throw you for a loop at any point during the game. Those corpses for a start, the demon children, everything in this game is designed to disturb you from start to end. However, these disturbances are not part of some desire to scare you for no reason. They're part of an internal psychological study of the character who experienced the most sorrow throughout the game. None of the main cast here are exactly designed to be analysed or to be psychologically deconstructed by this game, but rather they are the recipients of the psychological disturbances of one particular character who went through a terrible ordeal prior to this game, that being Alessa. I think this is what makes Silent Hill stand out just a little bit more. Within the horror genre, there tends to be a beast, there tends to be a monster, there tends to be a killer or something like that. But very rarely do you get a misunderstood child who's just trying to escape her present circumstances, and hopefully drive everybody away from the town so that they don't have to suffer the same fate. Throughout this entire game, you are manipulated by Dahlia into believing that Alessa and the demon are the things that are going to bring an end to your daughter, yourself, and Silent Hill as a whole. However, Dahlia ends up wanting to be the proxy for all of these things to happen to start with. It's quite clear that we can call this game a masterpiece in the horror genre. I mean, even without the most advanced visuals or the most advanced pre-rendered backgrounds, the game manages to disturb you based on sound, sight, and all of these other smattering of elements that just come together in this one horrific package. This is why Silent Hill will always stand out as a masterpiece to me. Given its plethora of horror implications, the actual potential that this entire town possessed was just immeasurable at the time. And that is why I am going to give Silent Hill a 9 out of 10. I would wonder what this game would look like remastered, but I'm not sure how well that would help the entire experience. Whether or not it would detract from the whole idea of what it was going for, or what it was trying to achieve in the first place. Well, that's the end of the video. Thanks for sticking around. I appreciate you guys checking out my analysis video. I even gave it a rating, as you can see. I'm going to take a little break because I did do that playthrough back to back, but if you have any suggestions for what game you'd like me to cover next, feel free to drop a comment below. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Too self-promotional.